Please stand for the Star-Spangled Banner. Mr. Helmuth. Woo, thank you, Mr. Helmuth. I'm going to call on the Chairman of the Board of Selectmen to introduce.
Good evening, everyone. Dan Dunn, Board of Selectmen. We have very special guests with us tonight. We have from our sister city, Nagaokyo. They have been. We've been doing this since 1984, and let's see, our itinerary includes visits to the Bishop, Audison, and the high school, and they're also going to Minuteman. They went to the State House. I saw a picture with them with Representative Garbely. They're doing the Freedom Trail and through Lexington, the Jason Russell House. They're doing performances at the Japan Festival yesterday at the Boston Common, and they're going to the Red Sox game tomorrow night, and I think the weather's supposed to be pretty good. I'd like to introduce the representative from Nagaokyo today, who is an unusual one in that he is actually from Sudbury, Massachusetts, and he is teaching them at that school. So please welcome Connor Boyle.
Good evening, all. On behalf of Nagaokyo City, thank you for your continued support of this wonderful program. The organization and time sacrificed to maintain the sister city bond for over 34 years truly shows your continued commitment to the creation of a symbiotic global community, especially for our students for the past 14 years, in doing this exchange. Our students have enjoyed wonderful hospitality, incredible rich history, and colorful and caring families who show them what it really means to be American. Again, on behalf of your sister city, Nagaokyo, thank you for hosting us and holding these wonderful events. We are so excited to return your kindness in July and for so many years to come. Thank you again.
Good evening. If your precinct has not organized yet, we have to do it at the break. You have to appoint your chairman and your clerk. So you should know where to go. I'm not sure where all the precincts are because I didn't get a little list, but try and organize at the break. This might be our last chance to do it. I also want to thank Josh Lobel for the buttons. Josh. It's a pure labor of love for Josh. He does this for us without any compensation. He just loves to have us have buttons. The other night, we passed some good articles bylaws. The only thing that I didn't appreciate was after some of the speakers, not all of them, there was a rounds of clapping. I kind of don't like clapping because I think it's a bit uncivil in that, in one, it's kind of rude to the people you don't clap for. And it's an expression of, I view it as sort of an intimidation. If everybody's clapping and you're not clapping, you may feel intimidated. So if we could hold off from, which we've never really done and we really don't do, clapping after people speak. I know I've said things in the past, and I did say something the other night, but people kept doing it. So let's kind of refrain from that because I do think it's a form of intimidation and doesn't stand with our civility code. Are there any town meeting members? Well, I'll take that there. Any town meeting members who have not yet been sworn in? Everybody sworn in? Excellent. I recognize the chairman of the Board of Selectmen. Oh, wait, Dan, 1 second. We have to do our clicker test.
I should get mine.
So our question tonight, the smallest country in the world is Monaco. 1 for yes, 2 for no. The smallest country is Monaco. It is not. It's true. The Vatican is at 0.2 square miles, so the Vatican's the smallest. Now, Mr. Dunn. So you're going to run through the names? You didn't stump us with that one.
While the names run through behind me, it is moved that if all the business of the meeting as set forth in the warrant for the annual town meeting is not disposed of at this session, when the meeting adjourns, it adjourns to Monday, May 7th, 2018 at 8 p.m.
Oh, yes. All in favor? Opposed? No. Okay, during the break, we have the girls' tennis club? Tennis team. Out there selling goodies, so go out and visit them. Any announcements or resolutions? Ms. Olzinski. Oh, Dan's going to give us one first.
Mr. Moderator, the danger when you read without thinking. May 1st, not May 7th. Or May 2nd, excuse
That
me.
is. Wait. Today's the 30th.
I apologize. I
One,
moved us to the wrong date.
May 2nd.
Yes.
Wednesday is the 2nd.
That
So
is
we
it.
just adjourned. If we don't finish tonight, we adjourn to Monday, May 7th.
I
We
so
want to
move.
adjourn to Wednesday, May 2nd. All in favor? Opposed? Thank you, Mr. Dunn. Al.
Just 2 quick announcements. Article 27 is the article on collective bargaining. The manager's office has settled with 2 of the unions, plus we'll be doing elected officials, M schedule, and non-union. Those reports or motions are stacked on the back table. So please remember to get those today so we can take action on those on Wednesday. Just to let you know that we have a vacancy on the Permanent Town Building Committee. So if anybody has a construction background, doesn't have to, but that's always handy, and they might be interested in serving on the Permanent Town Building Committee, please send a cover letter and a resume to the office of the Select Board. Thank you.
Mr. Moderator, Dan Dunn, Chairman of the Board of Selectmen. On the tables in back is the report on the Sims financing. For those long-term town meeting members will remember that the taxes that are collected on the Sims property are first go towards paying down the debt that we have, and then a remainder is placed into the general funds. And the selectmen are supposed to require report annually on the status of that money and what's happened. And after a gap, there is a new report that we approved tonight that is on the back table. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Olszewski?
Angela Olszewski, Precinct 17 and Chair of ATED. We're getting ready to open the Visitor Center for the season, and so we're looking for volunteers to staff it. We're also interested to know if you have any ideas for events that you'd like to see at the Great Plaza since it's been redesigned, or if you have a business and you'd like to sponsor an event. And we'll be in the lobby during break to take down your names and suggestions. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other announcements or resolutions? Ms. Howard?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Jane Howard from Precinct 10. Just another reminder about two efforts at the Spy Pond Trail. That is the trail from Pleasant Street to Lake Street, abutting the Route 2 path. We have the first one this Saturday from 9 to 12, and it will be mostly with the Arlington Belmont crew. They use the water, and so they're giving us their time to come and help pull invasives and clean trash. And the following Saturday, we encourage you all to come prepared with the appropriate clothing. We will have snacks, and we will do the same thing, but we will repair the trails that are there already, the paths that go down to the pond, and clean invasives and trash and pull things that probably need to be pulled. And please bring gloves, a rake, pruning shears. We'll have, if you stay around for the morning, join us for lunch, and you can admire the fruits of your work. So it's from 9 to 1 on the Saturday the 12th, or 9 to 12 this Saturday. Thank you. Anybody who is under 12 needs to come with a parent, and those who are under 18 need to come with a permission for same. They'll have to have permission in order to work. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Any other announcements or resolutions? Seeing none. Reports of committees. Do we have any reports of committees? Ma'am. Oh.
That's a school committee report. We'll do it in the budget sequence.
A motion received. Report of the school committee. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? So received. Sir.
Larry Slotnick, Precinct 7.
Priya Sankalia, Precinct 13.
Good evening, Town Meeting. I'm co-chair of the Arlington Recycling Committee. We're submitting our annual report to Town Meeting, and we have copies of it on the back table if you haven't already picked it up. Mr. Moderator?
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Okay. The Recycling Committee consists of 8 members, and we have many volunteers that help us with our efforts in the town of Arlington. We work very closely with Charlotte Milan, recycling coordinator, who's a member of the Department of Public Works. We have 4 initiatives outlined in the report that we've submitted tonight, and Priya is going to tell us about the textiles initiative.
So we just launched a textile initiative in the town of Arlington in association with the Recycling Center, which is Charlotte Milan, and the sustainability coordinator of the schools, Rachel Oliveira. And the idea behind the textile initiative is to get people to know that textiles can be recycled more extensively than just your clothes. It's a lot of other things. We've got a little information up there, the slide. That's actually going to be a buck slip that you'll find in your water bill. So it's actually going to be an insert in that. So that's going to go out to most residents. We're also doing, there's going to be a banner outside Town Hall for people to see when they drive by. There's going to be posters and flyers in town and articles. And then, of course, primarily we've got these Bay State textile bins outside several of the elementary and the middle school, where you can come and deposit your recyclable textiles. And and the money actually will go to the schools. So that's a really good initiative. And in fact, I don't know if you all noticed it, but last week there was a drive that the schools had for a competition as to who would collect most textiles. So we hope you keep your eye out on this and get more information about it, read up, and also share it with other people that you might know.
Thanks, Priya. I'd like to recognize, before I continue, Julie Brazil, who's a committee member, former co-chair of the committee, who helped us put this report together this week. And I'd like to briefly mention the 3 other items that are in the annual report, which you might want to refer to. But a lot of what Recycling Committee does is talk to people about contamination. Contamination of their regular trash with items that can go into your blue bin. We don't do a lot of trash audit here in Arlington. We don't have the funds to do that. But nationally, it is estimated that about 40% of the weight that goes into folks' conventional trash is actually recyclable materials such as paper, clean plastic and glass, and cardboard. The second item related to contamination has to do with what some people throw into their blue bins, which are plastic films, plastic shopping bags, food wrappers. These are not recyclable by the facility that we work with, which is JRM's Greenworks facility. It will end up costing Arlington a lot more money for these, for our recyclables to be sorted if we continue putting plastic film items into the blue bins. Another really exciting thing that's going on, which some people might consider contamination, but we don't really talk about it that way right now, are food scraps, commonly referred to as composting. This is going to be talked about over the next 5 years by communities all over the country, if they're not already talking about it, because food scraps make up about 25% of the weight of what goes into our conventional trash. Our conventional trash goes up to an incinerator facility, a waste-to-energy facility in North Andover, and it costs a lot of money to burn damp food. So the town is launching 2 community pickup locations for food scraps. DPW also subsidizes backyard compost bins, and there are 3 vendors that are now offering curbside collection service for your food scraps, and they'll provide you with a clean bin every week. So all that you need to do in your kitchen is start getting into the habit of not only sorting out your paper and plastic and glass, but also starting to sort food scraps. And the final thing I'll touch on, if I have a couple more minutes, are things that are not blue bin recyclables, but now have businesses and trade associations recycling those things. So we, working with DPW, we support Charlotte at the monthly Recycle Center. There's one every month, and this is when you would bring things that you used to bring to the big community collection days, which used to happen twice a year, but have been discontinued in favor of doing a monthly event. So these would be things like a broken snow shovel, broken lawn furniture, child car seats that are no longer serviceable, things that don't fit in your blue bin that are plastic, big metal objects, styrofoam, all the packing materials that come with electronics that we purchase. We're really trying to keep those out of folks' conventional trash barrels. They add weight, of course. When they get burned, they pollute the environment. So please look inside this recycling guide, which is on the table in the back, for the dates of when those monthly Recycle Center happens. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other reports? Sir.
John Ellis, Precinct 3. I want to give you a short update on a tree inventory that was conducted in Arlington during the summer of 2017. Last year at town meeting, we announced that we had received a grant from DCR that funded this program. We hired 2 interns and had 50 volunteers who walked every mile of street in Arlington and identified the location, the species, the size, and the health of every tree in town. We accomplished a lot more than we anticipated. We had committed to DCR to map just the public street trees, but we were also able to map the private street trees, trees on school grounds, trees on parks, trees on the bike trail. And the result is this map that you see behind me. It's now integrated into the town GIS system. Every little dot is a tree, and you can scroll down or zoom in and see trees on your street. So we recorded in total about 8,750 public street trees, 10,500 trees altogether, and another 6,000 or so sites that could house a tree. We don't know that there was a tree there before, but they're potential planting sites. So now that we have this data for the first time, we can start to do some analysis about what it means. So there are considerable benefits, and these benefits are derived from, again, the species and size of the trees that we have. The trees that we have in town are removing enormous amounts of carbon dioxide, filtering stormwater, providing energy conservation for town and public buildings as well as residents through shading and reduced heating costs and cooling costs. And the estimated value, if we were to replace all of these trees based upon their size and species, is over $43 million. So this is a publicly owned asset sitting in plain sight that doesn't sit on our balance sheet. It was sort of hiding right in front of us, but provides a lot of value to the town. A couple of important takeaways based on analysis of this, and the first is the distribution of sizes of trees. So in an ideal world, if you're managing a tree canopy, you want to have enough younger, smaller trees to replace the older, larger trees as they die. And the older, larger trees are the ones that provide most of the ecological benefits. And as you can see here in Arlington, we haven't really been planting enough new trees. And the result is, our expectation is our tree canopy will be declining in the coming years unless we make some changes, because we don't have younger, smaller trees to replace the older ones as they age. The other thing to consider is the diversity of species. Now, foresters, when they're managing an urban forest, want to have enough diversity of species so that if a particular pest or infestation comes through that hits only that one species or only that one genus or only that one family of tree, you have enough diversity that you're not losing all of your canopy. And in Arlington, because primarily of a big prevalence of Norway maples, which are a single species, it's about 46% of our trees, we have far too many maples, far too many of the genus and family of maple trees. And this is a risk factor for the town. We don't know that this is going to be a problem, but it's not just a hypothetical risk, because in the city of Worcester, which had a very small distribution like we do in Arlington, of tree species, when the Asian longhorn beetle came through about a decade ago, the federal government came in and started removing trees. They removed thousands of trees. So there were people in Worcester who literally went to work in the morning living on a tree-lined street and came home to find not a single tree on their street. So this is something we want to be concerned about and focused on and aware of as we're planting new trees in the coming years. As I mentioned, we mapped there were 6,000, roughly 6,000 places that could plant a tree. We don't know if there were trees in all of those locations. However, thanks to the work of a dedicated volunteer who was participating in our tree management plan, we do have a very good idea of how many trees there used to be in Arlington and how it compares to other communities. And the reason we can do that is because since 1930, the town has been reporting how many trees did it plant each year and how many trees did it remove. And based on that analysis, it looks like about 1980 was probably the peak for our tree canopy, and we're down about 2,000 public trees since 1980. And in this time period I'm showing here, over about a decade, comparing us with other towns, you see we're actually planting quite a few trees, but because we removed so many, we're at a net loss of 500 trees over this 2006 to 2017 versus the other towns. And that coincides with big storm events and microbursts that probably made our tree removals higher than desirable. So this is the not so good news, but the good news is that using this information, we were able to make a persuasive case to the town manager and, of course, to DPW, who also identified this as a problem and something the town wants to be addressing. And there's almost twice as much funding this year in the budget that was submitted to the Finance Committee for the planting of new trees. And the tree warden position is also funded full-time for the first time. And speaking now on my final slide of the tree warden's impact, the tree warden's job is not just to manage this $43 million asset that we have. They also are making sure that the town taxpayers are adequately compensated when public trees are removed or, according to our bylaw, when private trees are removed. And you can see as recently as 2014, the money that went from those fees from tree removals was as low as $25. That's 2014. And by this year, we're up to $14,000, and that's thanks to the efforts of town meeting for passing new tree bylaws, DPW for putting regulations in place for the public street trees to make those fees more related to what the cost of the tree is, as well as having a more active tree warden. So we think we're making progress. Hopefully in future years we'll be presenting not about net tree loss, but net gains, and we appreciate the town manager and DPW for their efforts. And thank you all to town meeting for your help as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you and your committee. Any other reports? Well, you can clap for the tree committee. Al?
Last Monday, I let it be known that we would be taking up Minuteman and then the budgets today. So with doing that, I'd like to move that Articles 3 and 29 be laid upon the table.
All in favor? All opposed? Articles 3 and 29 are on the table. That brings us to Article 34.
I would ask now, I'm going to introduce Steve DeCourcy, a member of our committee right now. He and Kevin Mahoney, the Assistant Superintendent Minuteman, who will be making the presentation, have asked for 10 minutes in total to make that presentation. So I request the extra time.
All in favor of 10 minutes for the Minuteman, please say yes. Yes. Opposed? You have your 10 minutes.
Okay, Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Stephen DeCourcy, Precinct 2, and a member of the Finance Committee. The Finance Committee for Article 34 recommends an appropriation of $4,936,724 for Minuteman. And for you new town meeting members, by voting this appropriation, you're also voting to approve the Minuteman budget. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Mahoney in a minute to go through the Minuteman budget. This year, the total budget is $21.1 million. It's an increase of 11.3%. Now, Minuteman is unique in Arlington because in addition to the cost of education, health insurance is included, retirement appropriation is included, and capital costs are included. And because the new school is under construction, this is the first year that we really get hit with a capital assessment. So if you remove the debt service for the new school, the increase is actually 3.78%, but with the debt service, it increases to 11.3%. This budget for the upcoming year, fiscal 19, will be the last year of the existing Minuteman building. The new building is due to come online in August of 2019. At the end of the presentation, we're happy to try to answer any questions, but right now I'd like to turn it over to the Assistant Superintendent for Finance for Minuteman, Kevin Mahoney.
Mr. Moderator. Good evening. I'd like to present the Minuteman budget and assessment to town meeting tonight.
Just announce your name for the record.
My name is Kevin Mahoney. I'm the Assistant Superintendent of Finance, Minuteman.
Thank you.
As Mr. DeCourcy mentioned, this is we are moving forward with our building project. It's underway. I'll have a brief update for you at the end of the presentation. But when we look at our budget, we present it in terms of the budget prior to excluding the building project debt, was $19,016,000. With the building project, the debt service is about additional $2,143,000, which is up about $1,467,000 from last year. So that brings the total budget to about $21,160,000, and an increase of about $2.1 million in total. And assessments for the member towns, $13,819,000. Again, about $1.5 million of that driven primarily by the debt service. As we look at our budget history over the last 4 years, we've been trying to work the budget down on the operations side in anticipation of moving into a smaller school with a smaller enrollment of 628. We're still adjusting to hit that enrollment, but in terms of our operating budget, we're trying to size it so that we can accommodate that. You see the spike in the current year, primarily driven by the initial debt service. In terms of specifically the Arlington assessment, you'll see that the total assessment is up about $645,000, and you see the cost components of that. But when you look at the subtotal assessment within the tax levy, that's the year-over-year increase in the assessment exclusive of the building debt. And as mentioned, it's up only about 2.4 compared to the current fiscal year, with the increase in the building project debt of about $548,992. So, and I know that the town of Arlington, along with 5 other of our member towns, have excluded that debt from the levy limit. In terms of some of the cost increases in our staffing, when we look at it, our compensation obligations went up 3% in terms of just salary costs, about 1.6% in the overall budget as it relates to our collective bargaining obligations and non-teaching staff. Our health insurance is budgeted at a 4% increase, and the Minuteman Retirement Assessment is funded an additional $50,000 in compliance with the PARAC funding schedule. Some of the other major drivers, our stabilization account, we're funding about $300,000 this year. That's up $200,000. In the past, we've consistently been funding it at about $100,000. We've increased that somewhat in anticipation that there will be some items in the building project that will not be funded within the project, particularly as it relates to furniture, fixtures, and equipment. The MSBA formula is pretty standard throughout all high schools, comprehensive high schools. It doesn't give any consideration for some of the equipment needs of a vocational technical school. Some of the other things, as you can see, we do have some instructional equipment and furniture replacement as needed basis, and we do have additional homeless services for students that qualify for homeless assistance. When we look at the revenue plan, you'll see we're anticipating a slight increase of about $43,000 in Chapter 78, a slight decrease in our regional transportation reimbursement because this is our first year as a 10-member district, down from a 16-member district, and therefore our transportation costs will be less this year, which translates into less reimbursement next year. Tuition costs about $58,000. We're committing $540,000 of our certified E&D towards next year to reduce assessments. The total certification of our E&D this year was about $621,000. In looking at some of our costs, our administration costs, we're reducing a position that's bringing that down to a net of about $68,000. Again, in that structural services, seeing an increase primarily driven to the salaries. Student services, that's transportation cost increase. And as mentioned earlier, insurance and retirement costs going up as well. And when you look at the 7,000 and 8,000 series, we have a significant increase there, as previously talked about. 70% of our capital and debt is associated with the building project. Taking a look at our enrollment, right now we have 538 students. Of those students, we have a special education population of about 50%. When we look at the Arlington enrollment, we see about 114 high school students. And then when we look historically at our 10-year freshman enrollment, as you can see, we're starting to see more. The last couple of years, we've had in-district enrollment somewhere around 100. The way it seems to be trending now, that looks like that's going to be consistent this year. I should point out that the 2017 number represents 101 students from 10-member towns. In 2016, we received 99 students from 16-member towns. So I think the interest from the remaining 10 towns in district has seemed to be picked up. We expect a little bit less in our out-of-district enrollment, but primarily due to regulations. Here's the trend in Arlington. There's 115 students. That includes a postgraduate student, down 6 students. So I just want to talk a little bit about the school building project. Pleased to report that despite the challenges of the winter, we're on time and on budget. It's our expectation that the school will open in August of 2019. This past month, we celebrated the so-called topping off ceremony, when the completion of the final beam being placed on the building, and that was a significant milestone for us. So, as you can see, the schedule before you, we expect to be in August of 19. Just an overhead view of the site. All of the foundation and steel work is up and in place. Right now, the concrete roof decks are being poured, and also the exterior masonry walls being built as well. The topping off ceremony, as I mentioned, with the ceremonial flag and tree on the final beam was placed, and just looking in terms of moving forward, we are pursuing campus partnership opportunities. We've retained the UMass Donahue Institute to assist in consultation and procurement services to see if there's an opportunity to monetize and develop private-public partnerships to generate revenue to reduce the capital obligations of the district. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, sir. Do we have any questions? Mr. Jameson.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Gordon Jameson, Precinct 12. I've never really paid attention to one of the items that was listed, the E&D. Is that essentially the equivalent to what a town would call free cash?
Sir?
The answer is yes.
Okay, thank you. You said 70% of the capital is the building. Is that amount going to increase further, or is it going to be flat? That portion, the 1.5 million.
We still have. This is projecting a second of 3 bond sales in next year's budget, so we do expect that to increase once we place the.
And the other 30%, is that all short term that will disappear shortly?
Yes. There's some funding for the stabilization fund that I mentioned, and there are some short term leases that will be.
So that part will disappear.
Eventually, yes.
And what's the history of your healthcare since you're the finance guy?
Yeah.
What's the history been for the healthcare? Because I know this year ours actually was flat.
We've been trending in a favorable direction. We're involved with a health trust, which is a joint purchasing group of 4 vocational technical schools. We were on a premium basis with Blue Cross up until 2 years ago, and we found that our experience and our actual claims paid was much lower than what our premiums were being paid. So we went to a self-funded model, and we have found that experience has been very favorable for us. We've been able to develop a substantial cash reserve to meet the cash flow requirements of being a self-funded group. And although we budgeted 4% back in February, it's going to be much closer to somewhere around 2.5%. So it's been trending favorable.
But you're not in the GIC. We've gotten tremendous, you're not in the GIC.
No, we're not. No, we found that our own experience has been favorable enough for us to
And you compared
keep it affordable. Yes.
versus the-
When we were in a premium plan, we used to have to report each year to the state how our plan compared to the GIC.
And lastly, your retirement, what percentage funding do you have?
87%.
Okay, and the OPEB is something for another day?
We are making slow strides
Okay.
on OPED, about 50,000 this year. So yes, it's something that actually the district's finance subcommittee will be discussing tomorrow night as far as developing a long-term
Yeah.
strategy.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ruderman?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Michael Ruderman, Precinct 9. The potential uses of the old Minuteman building have been something that we in the Minuteman community have been talking about for a long time, but I believe this is the first time this evening that the possibility has been suggested. Mr. Moderator, could I ask for a couple more details on what those possible revenue-producing uses might be once the new building is completed and the old Minuteman becomes available for other uses?
Certainly. Sir?
The plan is to demolish the old Minuteman and to develop athletic fields. The extent to which we can develop those athletic fields is still uncertain at this time until we get further along into the project and see where we stand relative to certain owner contingencies that could be applied to the athletic fields. However, we are going to be soliciting proposals of interest to see if there are those that want to partner in different types of wellness-related programs, maybe invest in some playing fields that may be larger in scale. We've had discussions about maybe a pool or things of that nature, because the pool that's currently at Minuteman will go away, and that'll create a void in the community. We're also maybe be interested in seeing if there's some other partners that may be interested, say higher education, that may want to develop and build a building on the property. To the extent that that happens, that any revenue that would be generated would help offset the debt service. So these are things we're exploring. We hope to have these proposals out on the street very soon. The thing that'll really move this forward is passage of legislation that's currently pending in the legislature.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Ruderman. Anyone else have any questions of the gentleman or in Minuteman in general? Seeing none, we're ready for votes. Thank you, sir. So we have before us a recommended vote of the Finance Committee for the Minuteman appropriation, as printed in your reports. As soon as we get the green light, go ahead and vote. 1 for yes, 2 for no. Couldn't see it. We have an affirmative vote, 212 in the affirmative, 1 in the negative. It's a vote, and I so declare it, and that ends Article 34. Mr. Tosti, can you take 29 off the table? Oh, Mr. DeCoursey, go ahead.
Excuse me, Mr. Moderator. I meant to do this earlier. Actually, getting up in the balcony is our Arlington representative to the Minuteman School Committee, Sue Scheffler, so I want to recognize her as well and thank her for all her efforts.
We can clap for Sue.
I move that Article 29 be taken from the table.
All in favor of taking 29 from the table, please say yes. All opposed? 29 is off the table. Mr. Tosti, you're up.
Ladies and gentlemen, all this work is done on the budget, so could everybody take their red reports out, the Finance Committee reports, because I have some changes to make. Unfortunately, when you do things with Excel spreadsheets, sometimes Excel spreadsheets have a life of their own. And there's no, except for the school budget, there's no actual changes to any of the budgets. But could everybody turn to B1? B1, it's the first page of the budgets. Okay, what happened was on the right-hand side with the change and the percent change, some of those simply didn't appear. So what I'm going to try to go through now fairly quickly, again, it doesn't change any of the actual numbers, so if you don't want to write these down, that's fine. If you're interested, please do. So let's take on B1, Board of Selectmen, Water and Sewer Enterprise Fund. So fourth line down, Water and Sewer Enterprise Fund, all the way over to the right. The dollar change is 2008-10, and the percent change is minus 9.88.
That's in there. That's in that budget.
Okay. Go down to Water Sewer Enterprise Fund. I'm sorry, it was the next one.
Yep. That has
Under
nothing.
Administration and Licensing, Water Sewer Enterprise. Same numbers. It should be 2810 and minus 9.88. It's the same as above. It just wasn't brought down. Okay, if you could go to page B2, and that's what all these changes are except for the schools. Go to B2, Information Technology, Detail of Personal Services, Assistant Director of Information Technology, should be an increase of 6,646, 7.84%, sorry, 7.64%. 6,646, 7.64. And then under Munis Systems Analyst, right below it, or 3 places below it, 87,207. The increase is 6,190, 7.64%. The next page is Controller, Detail of Personal Services, Mail Stipend. Obviously, the dollar change is $2,080. Down below under Treasurer Collector, out of grade pay, right near the bottom of that section, again, the dollar change is the same as $25,732. Okay, B5. Parking. Parking meter offset. You see the number there, 728. The percent change is 1.59%. And then parking meter stipend down below. Is a minus 500 and a minus 50%. Planning and Community Development, Assistant Director, Detail of Personal Services, Assistant Director. The change is $9,848, a negative, and a negative 10.46%. $9,848 negative is under Assistant Director, minus 10.46%. B6, Redevelopment Board, rental. So you see under rental of property revenues, Parmenter and Dallin, and then total and rental. So if you go all the way over to the right side, where there's nothing. So under Parmenter, the revenue is a plus 4,362, 4,362, 1.92% change. Dallin, dollar change, $116. Plus 0.26%. And then under total and renter properties less expensive, the numbers are the same. It's a plus 4,478, 1.64%. And then down the bottom, under rental properties, revenues less expenses, 4,478, 1.85%. Okay, Public Works. Page B7. Go down through the top part, Public Works Administration, Recycling Fund offset. Take that across. It's a plus $20,000. Sorry, minus 20,000. I was just checking to see if you were listening. 133.33% change. Under engineering, detail of personal services, assistant town engineer. It's a plus $2,778, a plus 3.75%. 2,776 plus 3.75%. Go to page B9. At the top, sanitation, highway. Highway total. Right where it says 1,652,127, it is a negative 34,142, a negative 34,142, minus 2.02%. Yard waste disposal, keep going down. Sanitation expenses. Yard waste disposal is at negative 16,000. Minus 13.01%. 16,000 negative 13.01. And then right below that under solid waste disposal, under recycling, obviously it's a $50,000 change. Jesus. Oh. I apologize. Facilities, page B10. Never thought I'd be caught with a live mic. Facilities. Under custodian, 1,972. That's there. Okay. Oh, the percentage is 4.08. Percentage is 4.08. B12. Fire services, fire chief. The change is 3,207, 2%. 3,207, 2%. Now, on the education, B13, there are actually changes. I think I made this known last week. So take a look at education budget on B13. Under fiscal 2019, you see the top 35 million, 560. Change that to 35 million, 711, 069. 35 million, 711, 069. And the bottom total, which is 66,102, change that to 66,253,022. 66,253,022. Now that was the addition of the $150,000 from the House Ways and Means Committee. Unfortunately, we couldn't change this vote at the time. I couldn't put that in because I didn't have a vote of either the Long-Term Planning Committee or the Finance Committee. We took those votes last Monday, and that will be the presentation to you. Okay, page. Oh, goody. B17. B17, recreation. Under senior clerk and typist, so B, recreation, detail personal services, senior clerk and typist should be 6,802, 22%. 6,802, 22%. And finally, Arlington Youth Counseling Center, B20. Under revenues, school contracts, 7,000, negative 7,000, minus 13.46%. 7,000, negative 13.46%. So this shows no matter how many people you have looking at these budgets, sometimes some things just fall through because you're not looking at that. And for that, I humbly apologize. And now the Finance Committee and the Manager's Office and all the department heads stand ready to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll administratively make all those changes. Okay. So what we're going to do is, like we've done in the past, we'll go through all the budgets. If you want to discuss one of the budgets, yell out hold. Then we'll go back and discuss the budgets that have been held. So I'm going to start. Finance Committee. Hold. Board of Selectmen. Oh, Selectmen, hold. Town Manager. Human Resources. Information Technology. Comptroller. Treasurer Collector. Postage. Board of Assessors. Legal. Town Clerk. Board of Registrars. Parking. Planning Community Development. Redevelopment Board. Zoning Board of Appeals. Public Works. Facilities. Police Services. Fire Services. Inspections. Education. Libraries. Hold. Health and Human Services. Retirement. Insurance. Reserve funds. Water and sewer. Recreation. Ed Burns Arena. Oh, wait, that's part of recreation, I think. No, Ed Burns Arena. Council on Aging, Transportation. Arlington Youth Counseling Center. Okie dokie then. We'll go back. Finance Committee. Who wanted to discuss Finance Committee? Okie dokie. Anyone else on Finance Committee? Nope, good. Board of Selectmen. Ms. Deonter.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Timur Kai Yantar, Precinct 7. I would like to request through the moderator that someone, perhaps a member of the Gender Neutral Select Board, explain the $99,000 increase budgeted for 2019 for the second line item, expenses, which is up 63% over the 2018 value on page B1.
Al?
The total, what happens here is primarily dealing with elections. So when you go down to the elections and town meeting, every other year we have a different number of elections. So if you look at 2018 or 16, 87,000, it jumps up in 2017 because you had 3 elections. You go down to 2018, you have fewer elections, and then up in 2019, you're back up to 3 elections now because you have primaries in the fall, in September a primary, and a November election. Now, the other thing that's happening is we are doing early voting. So we're doing early voting for 5 days of each of those elections. I think it all takes place in the town hall, so we're not opening all the precincts, but those 5 days cost a considerable amount of money with each of those 3 elections.
And as a follow-up, so when we're talking about elections, we're talking about the primaries, the generals, but also the special elections like for the debt exclusions, the Minuteman, and the special primary for the state senate seat last year, et cetera. Are these all what you're talking about?
Well, no, these are just the regular elections.
Okay.
But we usually end up covering those with a combination of state grants or state monies and from the reserve fund. These are just the regular elections. So for fiscal 19, we're going to have a state primary in September. We're going to have a state final election in November, and then the following April, we're going to have a town election. So you're going to have 3 elections, plus now we're doing the early voting. And then the year after that, we'll probably just have a town election.
So last question then is, we had 3 in 2017 as well?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Leonard?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. John Lenard, Precinct 17. Just a follow-up from what the previous conversation said. At the bottom of the page, it says includes the $49,000 for the early voting costs, et cetera, in anticipation that this will be reimbursed by the state. Is this a common practice? Has this been going on for a long time that we don't have to really worry about this, that the state always does reimburse us for early voting costs?
Mr. Chapdelaine?
Adam Chapdelaine, Town Manager. This will be the second time that we have to conduct early voting. It first went into effect 2 years ago during the presidential election that early voting had been passed in this state. So this will be our second go-round. And though I would expect the state would appropriate reimbursement funds, I can't say that would be absolute. If they hit tougher budget times, they would not be mandated to appropriate reimbursements to cities and towns to conduct these elections, or to conduct the early voting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. LaCourte?
Annie LaCourte, Precinct 15. I see that we're expanding the personnel in the Board of Selectmen's office by turning a half-time position into a full-time position. Is there someone who could speak to the expanded pressures on the office that are causing us to expand that personnel
Mr. Dunn?
Resource?
I wouldn't describe, Dan Dunn, Chairman of the Board of Selectmen, I wouldn't describe it as a single precipitating event. There's it's the elections and the paperwork and the reports and so on. There is not a single, a factor that I would say that drove it.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to discuss the Board of Selectmen? Oh, sir, Mr. Cristiano, sorry.
Greg Christiana, Precinct 15. This may be related to the last question. I apologize if it's a repeat. So the principal, clerk, and typist, both on, let's say, for the Board of Selectmen on on B1, and also for Ed Burns Arena on 18, which I know, B18, which I know we'll discuss later. Are these related? Because they're both increases of like very roughly 100%.
Mr. Dunn?
No, they're just unrelated. That's just the nature of what happens when you go from half-time to full-time.
Okay, thank you. And also, is this related to the last question about the increase from half to full-time? Is that the 0.5 to the 1?
Right, that is 0.5 a position to a full position.
Got it, thank you.
Mr. Diggins?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm Lenard Diggins, Precinct 3. Though I appreciate the explanation for the increase in expenses being linked to more elections in this year, I would have thought that would have accrued to the clerk's department. So could you give a little more detail on why it is that the expenses increases for the Board of Selectmen in election years?
Mr. Tosty's going to field that.
Elections are run out of the Board of Selectmen. They pay for these expenses. The clerk obviously has a major role in the elections, but most of all these expenses, the counters and those people, police detail, those are all paid out of the Board of Selectmen.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Anyone else on Selectmen? Seeing none, we're going to move on to the next budget that was held. Town Manager. Who wishes to discuss Town Manager? Someone did. Anyone? Anyone want to talk about Town Manager? Nope. Going once, twice, 3 times, gone. Information Technology. Someone want to discuss that? Sir.
John Ellis, Precinct 3. Mr. Moderator, my question is either to the Board of Selectmen or the Town Manager.
Yeah.
2 years ago, the Board of Selectmen has one of their goals to update the town request answer center. And having done the tree inventory, I now have a much better understanding of the limitations of the town's request and answer center. One of the biggest limitations isn't really public facing, but is an issue for our town staff. It limits their effectiveness and limits the amount that they can get done. Specifically, our town request answer center only records if you make a request for snow removal, to take care of a tree, for a water leak. It only records the address of the requester. So the town has an excellent ability to identify that John Ellis of 59 Teal Street is the person in town who complains the most, which I'm not, but doesn't have the ability to see, well, look, this tree on Sawin Street is always getting requests, or this sidewalk, 8 different people have asked to repair it. Other communities put in a system where you can sort of geolocate where the request is, and I would like to find out whether the town is planning in this next fiscal year to use some of the funds from this budget to begin to address that problem. I understand it's not a simple thing. There might be union issues, there might be training issues, but it would be great if we could have an IT request system that allow us to do this reporting and allowed us to, frankly, make our employees more effective. Because right now, if John Ellis from 59 Teal Street says there's a problem on a tree on Sawin Street, and it's the big one, you know, the tree warden goes out and looks around and says, well, which was the big one? You know, there's no way to tag this. So that's my question for the Board of Selectmen or the Town Manager.
Mr. Chapdelaine?
Adam Chapdelaine, Town Manager. So I guess a multi-part response. So one, the funds currently budgeted for the Request Answer Center, and any of our mobile or customer-facing technology is actually budgeted in the Town Manager's department. So any expenditure of funds would come out of the Town Manager's office, primarily because it's managed by the Public Information Officer that's part of the Town Manager's office. So I'll say One, we've tried this year to better integrate the Request Answer Center into our GIS. So there's a connection from what is entered into the Request Answer Center to our GIS, which is better at geolocating, but it's not getting as far as you're suggesting. We also spent time this year rolling out the mobile app, which also doesn't achieve what you've laid out, but hopefully provides better options for people to be able to send in requests. So additionally, I can say we can look at in the next year. I've long wanted to update our Request Answer Center. It's tough to untangle all the tentacles it has into our various departments and the workflows that we have in place, but I think that investigating and eventually rolling out a program like you've described that has those benefits and other benefits would be wise for us to do.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else on information technology? Mr. Deist.
John Dice, Precinct 13. I'd like to know how vulnerable, well, I should preface that by saying that increasingly there are stories about cities and towns and hospitals, et cetera, that have been hacked and information frozen or, if you like, taken hostage of. And I'd like to know if we even have any idea how vulnerable we might be to such a situation.
Mr. Good? I'm not sure we want to tell him.
David Good, Chief Technology Officer. We did a security assessment this past year on our network system and desktop infrastructure. And the findings were sort of some basic minimal types: keep your operating systems upgraded to a specific level, have your security updates done on a regular basis, which we do, and upgrade your virus protection software. Change your passwords every 30, 60, 90 days, depending on how we decide to do that. But those were the major findings.
Are people aware of the issues that are associated with clicking on an email to open something that might be nasty, et cetera? I mean,
right
are
after
people
they do
generally in the town aware of that?
Yeah. We send out alerts when we belong to two different reporting agencies that send us updates, and we send those off to the community with regards to, basic rules. Don't click on anything that, or don't open anything from somebody you don't know. Don't click on anything that looks questionable, and if you don't have an account or a relative who'd like to marry off his daughter to you, don't click on it.
I'll try to remember that. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Good. I'm sure Mrs. Dice will appreciate that. Anyone else on information technology? Mr. Peluso.
Ted Peluso, Precinct 6. I got to appreciate Mr. Dyson bringing up the issue. It just reminded me of something. I had the occasion to go onto Facebook a couple of years ago, and I was surprised to find that complainants, unreasonable complainants, were able to send their unreasonable complaints to Facebook sites that were run by town departments. So I guess what I'm saying, it's got nothing to do with the budget, but with all the nonsense that's happening with Facebook, with all the stuff that's happening with Facebook, I hope you guys are considering whether or not we should drop Facebook.
You gonna drop it, Dave? It's beyond his pay grade. Anyone else on information technology? Okay, that ends that. Treasurer collector. Mr. Jameson, and then Mr. Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Gordon Jameson, Precinct 12. First, I want to thank the Selectman, Town Treasurer, and the Manager's Office for the Sims report. I have one simple question. What is the balance on our debt? I don't think that was presented in the report. How much we're paying every year and how much revenue that's not going into the general fund but is going into the Sims every year. But how much do we still owe? And how many more years do we have to pay?
Adam Chapdelaine, Town Manager. So it'll be paid off in FY22. I don't have the exact figure at my fingertips, but it's probably approximately $2.6 or $2.7 million remaining to be paid. I think it might be on the back side of that sheet, which I don't have on my hands. If you add up,
it says when it'll be done. I don't know if it said the amount, but thank you.
So that means we can pull up the debt sheet.
That means not this override time, but the time we get to the next one, there'll be $600,000 in those projections that are not in projections now.
Yeah, it's already in our long-range projections as they go forward.
Okay.
And you're absolutely right that this year $678,000 would be accruing fully to the general fund once the debt's paid off.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Leonard?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. John Leonard, Precinct 17. A quick question. What is the definition of out-of-grade pay?
Adam? Oh, Mr. Chaplain?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to do it. All right. Adam Chapdelaine, Town Manager. So since Mr. Carmen was elected treasurer, as I think the body knows, Mr. Carmen's worked towards the professionalization of the department. So he has taken a diminished salary for the work that he's performing as treasurer-collector, but the deputy treasurer and the cash manager, who were previously employed in the office, are performing higher duties that were previously associated with the treasurer-collector's position. So that out-of-grade pay line represents the amount of compensation that both the deputy treasurer and the cash manager are receiving for their out-of-grade work in the new, or the interim setup, as I would describe it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else on the treasurer? Oh.
Beth Ann Friedman, Precinct 15. And Mr. Moderator, I apologize if this isn't within the scope, but I was wondering, with respect to Sims, is there any way that the town can help convince powers that be that we should convert some of those rental units to condos?
Well, we'll allow, because there's nowhere else to ask it. So, Adam?
I don't know. I mean, that was the initial plan, as most of you know, that each unit has its own occupancy certificate, and the plan was to ultimately convert those units to condos to increase the revenue to the town. So I hope this is somewhat within scope.
Adam Chapdelaine, Town Manager. I'll let the moderator decide if it's in scope or not. Adam Chapdelaine, Town Manager. The original land disposition agreement, LDA, that sold the property included some incentives for the property developer and owner to convert units to condos. They never utilized any of those incentives to convert to condos. It's not a conversation that we've pursued with the property owners in the past couple of years. But there is more tax value for the town when apartments are converted to condominiums, so it's something I'd be happy to discuss with the Director of Planning and Community Development in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else on the treasurer? Seeing none, we're going to move on. Board of Assessors. Mr. Revelak.
Steve Revelak, Precinct 1. Just as a crib sheet, I brought a copy of my property card for a small row house assessed with an assessed value of some $419,000, which, as I've noticed, sales of homes in my area. That assessment is basically spot on, and I commend you for your accuracy. So what I was wondering is, how does the Assessors Board, first question, how does the Assessors Board go about making year-to-year adjustments in assessed property values?
Paul Tanny, Director of Assessments. We just check the sales throughout the calendar year of all properties in your neighborhood.
Okay.
Sale price.
That's it. And I've also noticed that on the, on a typical property card, the value of a property is further broken down into building value and land value and yard value. And building value and land value tend to change at different rates. And could you elaborate on how the two are treated differently?
Well, when we check the sales in a particular year, we check how they sold by building style. And if those numbers come out okay, we go to the land value and then we adjust that accordingly.
Okay.
We think the land should be adjusted more than the building.
Now, is there a single base price for lot square footage throughout the town?
Numerous.
Oh, there are numerous ones?
Yes.
Okay, and that varies according to?
The size of the lot.
Size of the lot. Okay, and your department also is responsible for setting the millage rate?
Correct.
For property taxes? And it's done, from what I understand, it's done basically the same for commercial and residential?
Correct, yes.
So you take the amount of expenses billed through property taxes divided by the number of mills, thousands of dollars of assessed value, and it's a division problem with some auditing.
Yes, exactly.
All right. I'm wondering, so your department has 3 assessors?
There's myself, we have a data collector, and 2 clerks.
How do you feel you have enough resources to deal with all the properties in town?
We do, because we sub out some of the work to help us.
And my last question is, your budget lists $32,648 of expenses. I mean, it's a modest amount, but could you describe what that's for?
19,000 is for computer maintenance,
Okay.
which houses our Patriot Property software. The rest is dedicated towards travel, consulting, and other expenses for fees for certain conferences and schooling that we go to.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Revlock. Thank you, sir. Anyone else on Board of Assessors? Mr. Ciano.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Frank Ciano, Precinct 15. Some years ago, we talked about or considered making a separate tax for commercial as contrasted to residential, and I noted that our commercial base is about 5% of the whole. I wonder if that's ever been considered again, because in other communities, they seem to be flush with money because of the increase from commercial. Has that been considered? Or
Mr. Dunn's going to give us the answer.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Dan Dunn, Chairman of the Board of Selectmen. Chairperson of the Select Board today, I guess. So that rate, which is the differential rate between commercial and residential, is set actually by the Board of Selectmen. And so every year we have a tax hearing, and Mr. Tierney and the Board of Assessors and the Selectmen meet, and Treasurer Carmen is there as well. And we talk about it, and then we consider whether or not we want to charge more to commercial than we did, and the assessor also provides for us, if we made it 110%. For instance, we made the commercial 110% of the residential. How much money would that generate, and how low would the residential rate go? And we evaluate it, and every year we kind of look at it and we say, if we do this, we're going to scare businesses off more than we are actually going to improve the situation for the residents. And so we choose not to do it. So I would definitely, if you want to weigh in on that, you should bend one of the 5 of us our ears, the town manager, of course, and Sandy. and then try to, and then come to the hearing next year and make the case.
Thank you.
Mr. Jameson?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Gordon Jameson, Precinct 12. In case you're wondering when that hearing happens, the hearing happens usually in the first week or so of December, and it's held as part of the Selectmen's meeting. The Fiscal Resource Task Group of 2020 shows up every year, not so much everyone else. It's, to my mind, one of the most important hearings. It's a public hearing at a time for certain. It's one of the most important hearings that's held all year in the town because it sets your tax rate and it addresses the question that was asked previously. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. Gentlemen, yep, there you go.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Larry Slotnick, Precinct 7. Kind of along the same lines, not about having a different tax rate for commercial versus residential, but many cities and some towns, I believe, have, offer an abatement for owner-occupied units, meaning that investor-owned units, which is becoming more and more prevalent in East Arlington, pay higher taxes than owner-occupied two families. And I was wondering if the town has ever considered that kind of structure.
Mr. Dunn's finding out.
I was verifying that was mostly right. Mm-hmm. We do evaluate that one on a less frequent basis. That isn't something at that annual hearing. We don't talk about that one or have the homework for us. The last time we did the homework, it actually would increase the taxes for most of the people in town, and it wasn't. It did not look like it made financial sense to us. We will evaluate it again in the future, I'm sure. But so far, it certainly had been considered, but we did not think it was the right choice.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Dunn. Anyone else on the assessors? Mr. Fisher.
Andrew Fisher, Precinct 6. Is the amount of increase every year always the maximum 2.5%, or are some years is the increase less?
Mr. Tosti?
Pretty much, yes. The town of Arlington does not have a lot of new growth. We're not like Waltham with huge projects going up along 128, getting $3 or $4 million of new growth. So yes, we go up to 2.5% because we need to, as close as we can.
Mr. Schlickman.
Paul Schlickman, Precinct 9. Motion to terminate debate under Budget 9.
Just on the assessors. All in favor, please say yes. Oh, seconded. All in favor, please say yes. Yes. Opposed? Motion is terminated on Board of Assessors. It's 9:37. Let's take our 7-minute break. Please go out and organize your precinct wherever you usually do it. Yeah. Okay, the next budget, parking. Who wanted to talk about parking? I know, they're all over the place. They're getting here. Someone want to talk about parking? Someone did. Hearing none. Well, if whoever did figures it out. All right, I'll give it one more chance on parking. Who wants to talk about parking? Someone did. No one does now. Planning and community development. Mr. Marr.
John Marr, Precinct 14. This is more of a comment than a question. Jenny's going to be totally embarrassed by this. I'm astonished that the salary for the Director of Planning is so low. If you look at some of the, certainly one of the key department heads in our town involved in so much that it goes on in the town, barely makes six figures. She's going to be totally embarrassed. I don't mean to do that to her. It's more about the position than her. She does a wonderful job, but it's more about the position that is so critical to the town's future. And I would ask that the manager and other individuals who would be primarily the manager to take a hard look at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mark. Anyone else on planning and community development? Ms. Freeman?
Beth Ann Friedman, Precinct 15. I see that you've added a position, Senior Transportation Planner. Can you describe what the role of that person will be?
Ms. Raitt?
Jennifer Raitt, Director of Planning and Community Development. I'm going to read it to you, if you will. The Senior Transportation Planner will work to devise and implement neighborhood-based and town-wide transportation plans that aim to address increasing neighborhood traffic-related concerns and demands, and also to advance a number of transportation initiatives and advance long-term transportation planning goals of the town, including the goals of the master plan, various plans that the Transportation Advisory Committee has tried to push forward, including impact analyses and follow-up, decreasing congestion in town, and providing people with the ability to easily move about town and beyond. They're going to work with on a couple of planning initiatives that folks might know about, like the bus rapid transit pilot, the dockless bike share, and coordinate with other town departments, boards, commissions on larger projects across town.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thank you. Anyone else on planning and community development? Mr. Everlak?
Steve Revelak, Precinct 1. I know this is technically not part of the planning and community development budget, but since we're talking about traffic, I was wondering about an item in Appendix C of the budget, which is $9.2 million in change that we pay out as an MBTA assessment. And Mr. Moderator, I was wondering, I was hoping to get a description about what we're getting for that $2.9 million.
Mr. Chapdelaine, I think we should probably, though.
Adam Chapdelaine, Town Manager. Back, I think, 18 years in 2000 during transportation reform, there was a formula set forth by which MBTA communities were given a weight for the level of service they received by the MBTA, and then based upon that weight multiplied by their population, they were all then assessed for their MBTA service. So I don't know the exact count, but it's probably over 150 communities play an MBTA assessment, and it is supposed to be related based on that weighting system to their level of bus service, commuter rail service, and rail service. So that is our share of 77, 79, 87, 350, 80, I think, what am I missing, 67? 84? All right. Good. So that's what that's for. I will say we have a long-standing grievance with that system. We are one of the original MBTA communities, and the original communities are given a higher weight than new communities that were added. So we pay a weight of 9, and we think, and Belmont pays a weight of 3, and Quincy pays a weight of 3. We've written letters to our legislative delegation expressing our concern, spoken to the governor's office about our concern, spoke to the MBTA advisory board about our concern. Still all falling on deaf ears, but that is something that we've identified and keep trying to bang the drum on.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chapdelaine.
Anyone else on planning community? Oh, Mr. Warden.
John Warden, Precinct 8. As long as we're talking about MBTA and bus service, I wonder if you wouldn't have a good lobbying point with getting that assessment reduced when you consider that of the 15 worst bus services, it was written up in the Globe recently, 2 of them are in Arlington. The 2 that traverse our whole town are all have the highest level for missed runs, late runs, and they probably count the runs. Anybody who rides that bus, as I do, know that you could be waiting for 20 minutes and then 3 buses come along. Well, that's not really much good. They should come at 5-minute intervals. So I hope if you're talking to the governor about our assessment, you could also talk to him about the lousy service we get. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Planning and Community Development, seeing none. Budget 17, Public Works. Mr. Yontar, and then Ed. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Timur Kaya Yantar, Precinct 7. I have 3 questions. First, I would like to request through the moderator that someone, perhaps Director of Public Works, explain the $21,000 increase budgeted for 2019 for the 6th from last line item in listed as Tree Warden under Section D, Natural Resources, which is up 51% over the 2018 value. This is on page B8.
Yep, Mr. Chaplain.
Adam Chaplain, Town Manager. That's actually directly tied to what Mr. Ellis referred to earlier in his report of the Tree Committee, moving the tree warden's position from part-time to full-time.
Thank you. Second, I would like to request for the moderator that someone explain the $58,000 increase budgeted for 2019 for the second line item expenses under Section F, Motor Vehicle Repair, up 45% over the 2018 value on page B9.
Rademacher?
Michael Rademacher, Director of Public Works. In large part, that showed a shift in the funding of that department. We had been using funds in the personnel side to do some contracted work, and this was kind of an accounting. You'll notice that at the same time there was a decrease of $24,000 in personnel services. So there was somewhat of a balancing of the books there, and at the same time it's also a recognition that we had overspent that line item significantly in years past. As our equipment becomes more technical and computer oriented, we need to outsource more of the repairs.
Okay, thank you. And third, I'd like to request that through the moderator that someone explain the $45,000 increase budgeted for 2019. This is on page B10 now. The third line item, traffic signals maintenance under Section G, street lighting and traffic signals. This is an increase of 150% over 2018.
Mr. Rademacher?
Sure, Michael Rademacher, Director of Public Works. That additional amount will go specifically to maintaining signals above and beyond what we do now, most specifically painting of the infrastructure. If you notice in town, we have a lot of traffic lights, signals that are peeling and rusting and whatnot, and we need to do some preventative maintenance to extend their life.
So is it sort of long deferred maintenance catching up?
Correct.
All right, thank you very much to all who responded.
Mr. Tremblay, thank you, sir.
Ed Tremblay, Precinct 19, or salt attacking our traffic lights. Mr. Moderator, I'd like to ask the annual question.
Mr. Rademacher?
How much salt did we use?
It's my one somewhat softball. Michael Rademacher, Director of Public Works. This past year we used 9,488 tons at a cost of $671,000. I do want to share, too, some success in this topic. I know we've had this question at least my entire tenure. I don't know if you asked my predecessor the same question. So I've been tracking a lot of data points for not just snow and ice, but specifically snow and ice. And we've made significant improvements or equipment purchases over the past few years to better moderate and regulate the rate at which we put the salt down. Some equipment that we can put in our salt trucks that track speed of the vehicle and can calibrate the spreader and whatnot. And so before we had installed that equipment, I have data that shows the salt that we would put down per inch of snow over the course of a winter. And in FY 12 and 13, that number was close to 170 tons per inch of snow. And we've made these improvements over the past few years, and the last 2 winters, the average is closer to 130 tons per inch of snow. So I'm happy to report that. I mean, it's
and I'm happy to hear it.
We've talked about it a lot, and it's a significant issue for the town, and I'm glad to be able to present that.
Thank you. Mr. Moderator, I do have a comment. Last winter, after a couple of what I thought was egregious salting events, of the town salting roads that didn't need it, I emailed Mike a couple times, and he actually responded pretty quickly. I was surprised. But especially the second time, he did point out that salt is, well, actually it was both times. He pointed out that salt application is kind of an inexact science, and it's a little hard to know whether you need to or not, and they try to err on the side of caution. So a couple of days after the second time I emailed him, I was talking to one of the ladies at Shattuck's, and she described to me how she was sliding down the hills up around Gray Street. And I realized at that point that Mike was not goofing with me, that just because it's not slippery at my house doesn't mean it's not slippery somewhere else in town. And so, Mike, I'm sorry for giving you a bad time. You were right.
Thank you, Mr. Tremblay. Yes, sir.
I have a question, and I'm pretty sure it belongs...
Name and
to
precinct?
Oh, sorry. My name's Daniel Jalka at Precinct 6. I'm pretty sure my questions belong here, but Mr. Moderator, can you tell me if discussion of maintenance and installation of public drinking fountains is covered under Public Works?
It should be, I would think. Mr. Rademacher? A public
well, my opening question is just to make sure it's appropriate for me to ask questions about public drinking fountains under this category. So basically, I kind of have like a little bit of a gripe about relative lack of public drinking fountains in Arlington, and it just occurs to me that we seem to do a pretty good job sometimes when like a renovation is being done on a public park. For instance, Magnolia Playground has like a nice new public drinking fountain. But then there's other parts of town that seem to, they're kind of like metaphorical deserts for public drinking water. And so it's kind of been something that's been on my mind just here and there. So I would like to ask, Mr. Moderator, if somebody can give me an overview of what the budget process is for choosing where to put new fountains in, and for choosing what appears to me to be choosing to neglect certain fountains, so that they just there's kind of like these decoy fountains around town where you occasionally see it and you're like, you can kind of tell there's no chance this is going to work. So kind of a two-part question. Where does the decision-making process go into putting in new fountains? And on the flip side, where is the decision-making process to choose to neglect maintenance of some even like in the center of town? I think Arlington Center, Broadway Plaza, I think there's a defunct one, and it seems like there's some places where we do a lot better job to have some public, easily available drinking fountains.
Is that Mr. Rademacher or Ms. Reid, or both?
Michael Rademacher, Director of Public Works. I can answer, I think, some of your question. The maintenance of existing fountains is something that we've been spending a lot of time and energy to try to to correct. There was a change in the plumbing code which required additional infrastructure for a water fountain to be able to be turned on, backflow preventers and check valves and other plumbing things that I probably above my pay grade. But we've been upgrading them as best we can. I think in the past, a lot of times, the fountains were just attached to the local irrigation system, and that was that. We can no longer do that, and we can't turn fountains on that are plumbed that way. And to sometimes correct those issues is a difficult task. But we have been making strides to do so. So that's with regard to existing fountains that may not be working. As far as new fountains go, I think that's part of the planning process of a project. If it's a desire of the project, it gets included in the budget.
Okay, thanks. Mr. Moderator, one more question. Has the town given any thought to the possibility of, when fountains are put in, having them, I believe there's technology so that fountains can run year-round through the winter months. And I don't know what the cost would be for that, but has there been thought given to that? And does it seem like something we might be able to look forward to?
Ms. Raitt or Mr. Rademacher?
Michael Rademacher, Director of Public Works. The easiest technology for keeping a fountain from freezing is to keep it constantly running, which would be a significant waste and also an icing hazard near those fountains. Other than that, you'd have to have some kind of recirculation pump underground to keep the water moving, which I think would be beyond the fiscal ability for us to install.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Weber? Weaver. Ms. Weaver.
Janice Weaver, Precinct 21. I just want to say that those fountains are the most unhealthy things anybody could ever put in the town. People don't even use the ones in this building. They're really unhealthy, so I think you have to think twice about putting fountains like that around. That's all.
All right, sir, then Mr. Cristiano. Yeah.
Roderick Holland, Precinct 7. I just wanted to take this opportunity to commend Mike and his department for doing a bang-up job keeping the Minuteman Bikeway plowed this year. The Arlington segment was superior to the Lexington segment and just remarkably much better than the Bedford segment, so thank you.
Mr. Cristiano?
Greg Christiana, Precinct 15. Just follow up to the earlier question about the traffic signals maintenance. Can we expect that the figures to go down in future years, back closer to the 30,000 figure, or is there more catch-up to do in future years that we should expect?
Michael Rademacher, Public Works. I would expect that number to stay in the budget for some time. We have over 60 signal locations, and a good number of them need some maintenance of that sort.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Memon?
Serena Memon, Precinct 21. I am confused, Mr. Moderator, on this Water and Sewer Enterprise Fund. It shows up quite frequently in item 17 under all public works as well as under public works administration. As well as it's shown up quite a bit on other budgets too. So I was wondering if somebody can explain that and refresh my mind on memory
Mr.
on this.
Chaplain, can you explain this to us?
Adam Chapdelaine, Town Manager. So in general terms, the Water Sewer Enterprise Fund is an independent business. It charges fees and then pays the expenses associated with that business. But both DPW's time, the time of the Office of the Town Manager, the Treasurer Collector, IT, other town departments, all put effort towards running and operating the Water Sewer Enterprise Fund. So when you see something that says Water Sewer Offset, that's money being taken from the Water Sewer Enterprise Fund to represent the cost of a general government or general fund operating budget going towards the Water Sewer Enterprise Fund. So it's reducing how much is expended from the tax levy based on monies from the Water Sewer Enterprise Fund offsetting those costs. So you'll see that as a direct offset to personnel costs. You'll also see it as an offset to health insurance costs, and you'll see it as an offset to retirement costs.
Yeah, I've seen it all over the place. I also have a question, since the question about the water fountains was brought up, and I know we talked about lead in the water fountains is not very high. Why is it unsafe that some people are feeling this way? I know my husband feels that people spit into the water fountains, and that's probably one of the reasons why you shouldn't use it, but it's the water coming in that counts. So is there some technical thing that I should be aware of that I'm not paying attention to? Oh, sorry. Okay. That's it. Well,
Mr. Rodemaker, is the water safe coming out of those fountains?
Mike Rademacher, Public Works. I drink out of the fountains.
I'm happy to hear that. Thank you. I do too. So, all right. I'm good. Thanks.
Ms. Freeman?
Beth Ann Friedman, Precinct 15. I see a position for crane operator was added to the budget for this year. So my question is, does the town currently own a crane?
Mr. Tosti?
It's funny, we were having that conversation before. We've always had a position of crane operator. It's a particular license, but it's been up there right above it under motor equipment operator. So you see, one's going up, one's going down. Actually, the crane operator is the guy who runs the machinery that basically cleans out the drains. So if you got a water, a water drain, a stormwater drain, they have the truck and they drop the whole thing down. And with a pickup, this incredibly disgusting complex of stuff, and dumps it in the truck. That's the crane operator.
Thank you so much.
Mr. Tremblay?
Ed Tremblay, Precinct 19. This is a little bit salt-related, Mr. Moderator. I seem to recall a few years ago we bought DPW a wash bay for the trucks, and we're always buying new trucks for the town, and I kind of get it because I looked at one of the rec department trucks that they were getting rid of, and they were auctioning it off, and it looked at it, it had holes in the floor and things like that, and a lot of that comes from the salt that gets on these trucks. So I've kind of learned the hard way that if you wash your trucks a lot, it actually helps preserve them. So the question is, do we actually have a wash bay? Is it functioning? And is the new DPW going to have like a really killer wash bay that makes it really easy to wash the trucks? Because I know when you're really busy, like the DPW is during snow season, that if it's a pain in the neck, it doesn't happen. And so if we're going to spend money, what is it, $20 million on a new DPW yard, it ought to be a drive-through car wash that blows anything that isn't loose off the truck. So I'm curious.
You're going to buy one of these things?
Mike Rademacher, Public Works. We do currently have a wash bay, but it unfortunately it was not constructed to greatly meet the needs of the Public Works vehicles. This was years ago. It's used to some degree, but not as extensively as it should be. The new facility will have a much more appropriate, robust system.
All nice stainless steel and plastic so it doesn't corrode. And
all the best.
Excellent. Take a look at the Mass Ave car wash. They really did a good job building that one. So,
Mr. Schlickman?
Paul Schlickman, Precinct 9, motion to terminate debate on all items under Budget 17, Public Works.
All in favor? Terminating debate on the Budget 17, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Terminated debate on 17. That moves us on to 18, facilities. Mr. Yonter. Precincts 1, 3, and 16 have to turn in the clerk chair paperwork. 1, 3, and 16. Go ahead, Timur.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Timur Kaya Yantar, Precinct 7. I'd like to request through the moderator that someone, perhaps the Director of Facilities, explain the $31,000 increase. This is on page B10, budgeted for the third to last line item, overtime, up 248% over 2018.
Sounds like the state police.
I didn't say that.
Is our Director of Facilities? Here he comes.
Steve Nestrak, Director of Facilities. The $31,000 is an offset to a reduction of $60,000 in having third-party contractors.
That's the line salary offsets?
Yes.
So I'm hearing a lot of these large swings, not just in this department, but in other departments, are because of things being moved around in an accounting fashion. And I've seen in some portions of the budget that there are asterisks explaining this, and some there aren't. And it might be helpful to us if, when there's this accounting recategorization, that's done more consistently. Thank you. And thank you for your answer.
Anyone else on facilities? Seeing none, we'll move on to police services. Ma'am.
Thanks, Moderator. Amy Lynn Miller, Precinct 6. I have two questions, actually, on the police service budget. One is the administrative assistant pay grade going down $6,798,000. Can you explain that? And then the second question is the social worker, the new social worker for 2018, is that a full-time or a part-time position?
Chief?
Thank you, Frederick Ryan, Chief of Police. So the administrative assistant, I believe, is a function of a new person coming in at a lower pay grade.
Okay.
Is that correct, Karen? Lower step, I'm sorry. Karen
Lower
gets all
step.
the HR terms. And the social worker position is a half-time position.
It is half-time.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Oh. Yep.
John Ellis, Precinct 3. In previous years, and maybe in the current year, the town has a police officer who is stationed, I believe, full-time with the FBI, and my understanding is the federal government reimburses the town for his salary. Where would that appear here?
Frederick Ryan, Chief of Police. We do partner with the FBI on a number of initiatives. They do not pay for the base salary. They reimburse us for overtime expenses.
And what percentage of that employee's time is with the FBI?
I'm sorry, say that again?
The officer who is working on exploited and missing persons for the FBI, what percentage of his time is with the FBI?
He flexes his time both with the Arlington PD and the FBI, depending on his caseload.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Yep.
William Moyer, Precinct 10. Mr. Moderator, the question I have is on
The number of patrolmen hasn't changed at all since we instituted a 25-mile-per-hour speed limit. Are we sufficiently resourced to enforce this? And have the number of speeding citations gone up since?
Chief Ryan?
Thank you, Frederick Ryan, Chief of Police. We try to be both complaint-based and data-driven on our traffic enforcement initiatives. We don't go out and hand out tickets for the sake of handing out tickets. We focus on locations that are high incident, locations for injury and property damage as sort of one element of our traffic safety initiative. The other element is a sort of a customer service complaint-based initiative. So if somebody is complaining about traffic violations in the neighborhood, we try to provide that service. We have adequate number of police officers. I'm happy to say our crashes have gone down, and so have our citations. So in an ideal world, we'd have 0 crashes and 0 citations.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Stamps?
Susan Stamps, Precinct 3. First, I'm going to say really quickly before I get stopped that I took the police academy last fall, the Citizen Police Academy. It's a community policing effort and by the chief, and it was fantastic. It was like 8 or 9 weeks, and we learned everything about the Arlington PD. It was really great. But I rise to point out that in the spirit of changing the Board of Selectmen to the Select Board the other night, it might be nice to change the line item of patrolmen to patrol officers. Thank you.
Mr. Heim, is that happening with our gender-neutral language in the special?
Doug Heim, Town Council. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. It's not part of our town bylaws or our special legislation. I think it's something that we can address in a different manner.
Okay, good. Thank you. We'll look into that, Ms. Stamps. Mr. Leonard?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. John Leonard, Precinct 17, with a question to Chief Ryan, if I could. Every once in a while on certain budgets, we see mention of bulletproof vests. I don't see it this year. Is that something that is like only addressed every other year? Or could you maybe elaborate into, is there actually how many in the police department? Could we actually use more? Are we way behind in a ratio of bulletproof vests to officers, et cetera, et cetera?
Chief Ryan?
Thank you. Frederick Ryan, Chief of Police. We're adequately funded through the capital program to replace officers' body armor. They expire every 5 years, and we have an adequately funded program through the capital budget.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else on police services? Seeing none, we move on to Budget 21, inspections. Mr. Ruderman.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Michael Ruderman, Precinct 9. Paradoxically, I'm concerned that Budget 21 under inspections may not be adequately funded, given what state and national publications have termed as the historically rocketing real estate market in town, the number of building permits, both for new work, for renovations, for additions. Total budget of, from year over year is expected to rise less than 1%. And I'm wondering, how does the pace of work, how has the pace of work changed from fiscal 18 to fiscal 19, and is the 0.82% in the total budget enough to keep up with the number of inspections that need to be done?
Director Byrne?
Good evening, Michael Byrne, Building Commissioner.
Actually, thank you, town meeting last year for adding a position of local inspector to our department. The activity, the driver for the position was a lot of the good neighbor agreement stuff, the vacant storefront bylaws, which have all been very successful, I think, so far, and also for the increasing activity in our building permits. So we do have another position that's in here.
That's all. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else on inspection services? Seeing none, that brings us to education.
Good evening. I'm Kirstie Allison-Ampey, Precinct 15 and Chair of the Arlington School Committee. We're going to do a tag team presentation. We're trying to be quick. I wanted to say a very few words in introduction for our budget presentation tonight. This coming year is an exciting year for our schools. I see this excitement captured in 3 areas: new spaces, new students, and new ideas. Our biggest new space is the Gibbs. We'll reopen it this year as a 6th grade only school. The creation of a single grade school has 2 major advantages. It allows the school to focus on the needs of the early middle school child. It also allows us to maintain educational equity for our students in a cost-effective manner. The Thompson and the Stratton are other new spaces, and the Hardy addition is underway. All of these new spaces would not have been possible without the help of the town manager, capital planning, permanent town building, and the finance committees, and I would like to again extend our thanks to them. Our final new space is the high school. The project is progressing well, and you'll be hearing a more in-depth update on Wednesday. The next exciting new things is new students. We have them, lots of them. We have over 700 new students to our schools since 2013. Our challenge now is to maintain all of our schools' strength in the setting of this increasing enrollment. This budget outlines our progress. While still spending significantly less per pupil than either the average of the town manager 12 communities or the state, we are addressing our enrollment growth as well as the requirements of our special education students and our high needs population. The final excitement is seen in new ideas. The first new idea is the high school I already mentioned. It's in the feasibility phase, and again, you'll hear something updating on Wednesday about progress and future community involvement. The second new idea is an initiative we'll be launching over the next year to better describe the true needs of our school system and to work out what this would cost. Not as an unlimited wish list, but rather a reasoned look at the needs of education and of our students today. Public input will be sought, and I hope you'll become involved. I also wanted to acknowledge that our budget and our new rebuilt high school come with costs. You've already heard talk of a potential override and debt exclusion in the next year. I wanted to reiterate that we understand the downsides of these measures. Around my home, there are several elderly neighbors on fixed incomes. I'm glad that the town is working hard to create ways to mitigate the effects of tax increases on my neighbors and on yours. I also want to ensure you that the school committee is committed to using the town's funds wisely. As well, we continue to work to increase the funding Arlington receives from the state, since every dollar the town receives is one less dollar that must be raised in property tax. In conclusion, we appreciate the support we have seen from our town, and I hope you will join me in sharing the excitement of the year to come. And now Dr. Boney will present a few slides capturing highlights about our budget.
Thank you, Ms. Allison-Ampey.
Good evening, Kathleen Bodie, Superintendent of Schools. In my presentation about the FY19 school budget, what it will accomplish, I will be brief. More information about the budget can be found on the report left on your seats at the first night of town meeting, as well as on the district's website under budget. The FY19 budget accomplishes several goals. The first 3 are priorities you've seen in past years. Special education mandates to fund the costs of out-of-district placements, transportation, and other services. Support for high-need students, and funds for staff retention and compensation. We are currently in negotiations with our teachers, administrators, food service workers, and bus drivers. All three of these priorities are very important. But I want to emphasize a couple of other additions. So the FY19 budget will address the staffing needs for an ever-growing enrollment. You have one of these charts in your book. This slide shows the trend of growth over the next 5 years based on our projections. What the McKibben forecast closely parallels the growth that we have also projected in the district. What is noticeable about this graph is that we are going to begin to see larger classes at both the middle school and the high school in the next 5 years. The next priority is the Gibbs implementation. As we mentioned, we will be opening the new Gibbs School in the fall. While we continue to offer the same program as we currently have at Addison, there will be some innovative additions such as project blocks, recess, and a focus on social emotional learning. All teachers will have been provided professional development and responsive classroom strategies before the opening of school. Responsive Classroom, RC, is an evidence-based approach to teaching that focuses a strong link between academic success and social emotional learning. In the elementary level, over 120 of our teachers have already been trained in this approach. There are other initiatives as well that we will accomplish with this budget. One is that we are going to have full-time kindergarten teaching assistants, and we'll be able to continue our focus on social emotional learning and cultural competency practices through professional development. So moving on, the total amount of the FY budget is a little different than what's in your report. As Mr. Tosti mentioned, there are new numbers which approved by the Finance Committee, which includes an increase in Chapter 70 money of $242,000 from the governor's budget and an additional $150,000 from the House Ways and Means budget. With these additions, the budget represents a 7.9% total increase from FY18. This represents the additional Chapter 70 money, the 3.5% increase in the operating budget, 7% increase in special education, about $830,000 addition for 170 new students, which is about a 3% rate of growth just in this last year, and the annual offset for kindergarten tuitions, which are again offset by increased Chapter 70 revenue. If we were not opening Gibbs, then the total increase would be 5.98%. The last slide shows the relative proportion of funding sources for the school department budget. While the town appropriation is the major funding source, we also receive funding from grants and fees. So in conclusion, we remain appreciative of the support the town gives our schools in funding for the operating budget, capital projects, and all the school building projects made necessary by our increasing enrollment. But what I can also say is that I believe that the town receives from these investments our excellent schools. Thank you very much, and we'll be ready for any questions you have.
Thank you, Dr. Rhodey. Mr. Yontar?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Timur Kaya Yontar, Precinct 7. I have 3 questions. First, I would like to request through the moderator that someone explain this is on page B13 of the Finance Committee report, explain the $283,000 increase budgeted for 2019 for the 4th line item, D, Management Services.
Dr. Bodie?
Good evening, John Denizio, CFO, School Department. In the the way the budget is broke down in the Finance Committee report is just high-level pieces. So to break down that $283,000, it's going to be a bunch of different accounts, but
Does it tie into
basically what
something
it
in
is,
here?
it's salary. It's basically salary increases for the people that are funded from that category.
And that category is?
It can be a bunch of different accounts. That doesn't tie exactly to what we have because our breakdown is a little different based on object code or cost center or program. Would be part of it. Oh, I'm sorry. The Gibbs principle makes up a big part of that.
Sure.
Because opening the Gibbs school yet, where we need to add another school principal.
Right, okay. Thank you. Second, I'd like to request that the next line item, which is E, Operation Maintenance Programs, an increase of $532,000 over last year, also be accounted for. And I understand that the way it's written here in the red book and the way it's written here in the green book are different.
Yep. So a big portion of that would be salary increases for all the operational people. And then the other biggest piece is opening of Gibbs School. Makes up about $80,000 of that increase since we didn't have utility costs for Gibbs with opening it this year as the first year. So that's the biggest portion of that.
Okay, great. Third, through the moderator, can someone tell us how much is budgeted to be spent on acquiring books for the library at the soon-to-be opening Gibbs School? What budgetary category this will be coming out of, and where we can find this in the Green Book, the APS report to town meeting and fiscal year 2019 budget.
Dr. Bodie?
Kathleen Bodie, Superintendent. You won't find it in the Green Book. We don't have a separate line item for Gibbs library books. However, that does not mean we're not going to have library books at Gibbs. We've had fundraisers recently, thanks to Community Ed. We are also looking for other donations. And at the end of the day, we're going to take money out of a revolving account in order that we have the library fully functioning with opening day.
And is there a
I think that the
total
target number is probably going to be in the $70,000 to $80,000 range total monies.
And if the fundraisers and such fall short, you've got the revolving funds?
That's correct.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Anyone else on education? Mr. Marr. And then
John Marr, Precinct 14. I asked this question last year. I think the town could be rightly proud of the fact that we have kept our promise to all neighborhoods in the town to rebuild our elementary school system. Soon we'll be embarking on a new high school project, presumably, and the Gibbs will be opening later this year in a newly renovated, beautiful building. We've seen across the country a surge of teachers asking to be treated as professionals. I'm not saying that we don't in this town, but traditionally, is my understanding, that teacher salaries have lagged behind our surrounding communities and those universe of communities that we compare ourselves with. I'm wondering if I could ask through the moderator to the superintendent whether or not that is still the case, and if so, what are we doing about it?
Dr. Bodie?
Kathleen Bodie, Superintendent. The answer is that we do lag behind the average for the town managers 12. Many of you have already seen the most recent update on the salary analysis of all of our town positions. That is something that's being discussed in negotiations. And clearly, I can't talk about that right now, but we're very aware of that. And actually, even more than the teachers, our administrators are also considerably below the town manager 12. And I think that is something that is important to us, is a focus and a goal. But I take this opportunity to also want to recognize the incredible qualities of staff that we have teachers, our teaching assistants, our administrators, and all the support people in the district. They're really just outstanding, and they do deserve to be compensated. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Warden?
Patricia Warden, Precinct 8. I want to commend the school committee for having the vision to reuse the Gibbs School. I was instrumental in saving the Gibbs School from a loss when we closed it as a junior high school. At this point, I would like to ask if the school committee or Mr. Moderator, whomever I should ask, have they considered opening again the parliamentary school as a public school in order to relieve the pressure, student population pressure in the system?
Dr. Bodie, have you considered a parliamentary?
Kathleen Bodie, Superintendent. We have not at this point considered the parliamentary. Right now, the parliamentary is leased. I know that there is a potential vacancy for part of the building, and there's some discussion going on about that. The school itself is small. I think at the time that it was operational, it was probably somewhere in the 300s. It's probably even a little bit smaller than our peers. So there's always a cost when you renovate a building. As you know, what we're doing with Gibbs, I think was a great decision. Thank you very much for saying that, because I think it's going to be a tremendous asset to the town. And it is true that we are, even with all of the building that we're doing, we still do not have a lot of excess. In fact, we have very little excess classroom space. So it's something that we'll have to be looking at, but it would be not the ideal size, because you'd have another small school and the renovation and to bring up to code, and you'd also have the staffing that would be there. So I think that this is something that'll be in the mix as we look to the future and just see what happens. So we're hoping that the additions, both at Thompson and Hardy, as well as taking the pressure off of Addison, and of course the new high school will at least for the next foreseeable years, we'll be able to manage. That's the hope. Thank you.
Thank you. This woman over here with the scarf.
Hi, I'm Kate Leary, Precinct 4. I also happen to be the Hardy PTO treasurer. And while we're talking about the school budget, I want to point out a number that's not reflected in the school budget, which is that the PTOs are raising probably something like $400,000 or $500,000 and spending it on our students. And I guess what I wanted to say is that I think maybe there's a perception that a lot of these things are nice to have, that we're funding nice to have things, but I think we're increasingly funding have to have things. Including library books, often classroom books. We write a lot of checks to teachers who are spending out of pocket for pretty basic stuff like folders and materials for their classrooms. And I will say that as a treasurer, of Hardy, which does not have a lot of money in reserve, there's just a wide variation in how much the various schools are able to raise, that there is a lot of pressure, and that it's not comfortable. I think it's appropriate for parents to fund some things, but it's getting difficult. So I guess my question is there a way that we can reflect some of this spending and capture this data to make sure that it's getting into the conversations that we're having leading up to the override? For example, we've written checks to contractors to make what I would consider to be capital improvements to the school. So I would like that information to be captured, and I would hope, I understand how much prioritizing, how difficult it is to come up with the school budget when we don't get to fund everything that that we really want to fund. And I appreciate all the work that goes into it. And I think I'm just asking also partly that we make sure that the PTOs and also I would say Arlington Education Foundation are a big part of the conversation as we make decisions around the override. And I think I've talked to some people in the school department who are, very receptive to this idea, but we're here with sort of all of town government, and I think it's a broader conversation than that even. So I wanted to mention it here, and also ask the question about just collecting that data, and is there a way to get into the budget report next year? I'm not talking about field trips. I'm talking about some of the stuff that we really just couldn't live without.
Okay.
Anyone answer that?
Chair of the school committee is going to take this.
Thank you.
Kirstie Allison Ampe, Precinct 15, Chair, Arlington School Committee. I was thinking about most of the first part of your question, and I think that comes pretty firmly under the new initiative that we're going to be working on. We've already sent it to, it's going to be, it's been tasked to 2 of our subcommittees, curriculum, instruction, assessment, and accountability, and also the budget group. And I think the chairs of both of those committees are here, and I think they've heard your concerns and will be able to, it's a good point, and it's something we should incorporate as we go forward. The last bit about reporting out the costs, I don't know, but we will look into it. And again, the budget chair is here and can take that into consideration.
Great, thank you. And then the other thing I wanted to ask, which I think is more of a town question, I'm not sure, is that whenever I've reached out to anyone in town to ask questions relating to the PTO when we've had issues, I've had nothing but supportive and wonderful help from them. But I'm wondering, as we're handling increasingly large sums of money that the school department is relying on, and since we're a bunch of amateurs, if the town could help us by offering some kind of sort of formal support, maybe advice or guidance on financial practices, insurance, things like that, and if, we could be open to conversations about that.
Mr. Chapdelaine?
Adam Chapdelaine, Town Manager. I can't absolutely commit to it before talking probably to Town Council to make sure that we wouldn't get into any liability trouble, but I think it sounds reasonable. A combination of myself, the Deputy Town Manager, and someone from the Treasurer's Office could provide advice and guidance as you've asked.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Deist?
John Dice, Precinct 13. We repeatedly hear that schools in the United States are not so good. Well, Massachusetts has the best schools in the country, and Arlington is one of the best school systems in the state. If you go online and look to see, we're doing very, very well. But I want to point out that we're also very cost effective because, for example, Lexington is probably one of the best schools in the country, and its cost per pupil is much more than Arlington is. So I just want to point out that we have possibly among the best schools in the world, and as well, one of the best buys in terms of education for our children. Thank you very much.
Thank you. This gentleman in the back with the orange shirt.
Brendan O'Day, Precinct 14. One of the things I'm wondering is, with the new high school rebuild or with the vacancy at the Parmenter that's coming up, is there any consideration of taking the administrative offices of the school department out of a school building for safety reasons?
Adam Chapdelaine, Town Manager. I guess I'm closer to the microphone, so I'll answer the question. We're actively looking at whether or not school administration could be housed in the Parmenter based on the vacancy that the superintendent mentioned earlier. The Parmenter is under the jurisdiction of the Board of Selectmen, so we'd have to coordinate between myself, the board, the select board, and school administration. I do think in all of the concepts we've been looking at the high school building committee that the idea of a separate entrance for district administration would at least be considered in planning for those safety reasons as you've outlined, but we are looking at various alternatives to see if they even need to stay there in the first place.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. This woman right there, yep.
Naomi Greenfield, Precinct 15. My question is about the accountability and follow-up from the professional development that I know we're funding in the budget, specifically around cultural competency. And I was incredibly impressed to read in the green booklet about all the different things that are going on across the schools in terms of cultural competency. The Holocaust survivor came to speak at Audison, the Colors of STEM portraits of African American posters at the Brackett School, a lot of diverse books at Dallin. But it was also really interesting to see that in at least 3 of the schools, including Stratton, which is my neighborhood elementary school, there was no mention of the cultural competency goals or how the school was incorporating their learnings from the professional development into the school. So I guess my question is, how are our schools being held accountable? How are principals being held accountable for implementing some of the learnings from those professional development? And in the case of the schools that are doing a lot, how can we take some of the learnings across the schools and sort of scale them up or make sure that all the schools are receiving the benefit from those trainings?
Dr. Bodie?
Kathleen Bodie, Superintendent. All of our schools this year have goals around cultural competency. They probably should have talked a little bit more about what they were doing. But as far as accountability, this is something that is an ongoing discussion all year. Certainly discussions, I spend a lot of time in the summer just going over all of the goals for each school. So that is happening. And do they share among each other? They do in various ways. The elementary principals certainly meet regularly. We have meetings by grade level. For example, a school that might be looking at this year books in the library or in classrooms that have a more representation of the diversity that we would like to see. Those titles is something that can be shared out because not everybody has to look at every single book that we have. There's a lot that are similar across the district. In fact, Brackett just recently with the color of science project, they bought a lot of great books for this particular topic. And so these are titles that will be shared among other schools. There was a lot of difference in terms of what schools did this year, but there was not an intention that everybody did exactly the same thing. We had our professional day in November was totally devoted to this, but as I said, this was a goal that was embraced in all schools.
Great, yeah, and I just love to see, and maybe it's just not reflected necessarily in the book, but if however we can share those ideas across the schools more, and if there's way parents or other people can help, I think we don't have to reinvent the wheel, I guess, in every
You're absolutely correct. And one of the practices we have when people go to different conferences, in fact, we had a member of our central office that went to the program that was offered by the Human Rights Commission on hate symbols. All of that information was brought back and shared with all of the administrators. So, and then they in turn shared some of that back in their school. So we have mechanisms by which sharing goes on in the district, because I couldn't agree with you more. You can't live in silos in this work.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ellis?
Thank you, John Ellis, Precinct 3. I had questions and a comment about registration. First, I have a second grader or first grader and soon to be kindergartner, and the change in the process of how the registration works this year. For my first grader, we waited in line like we were going to a rock concert. Everybody thought the further in line you were, the better choice you got for your school. With the kindergartner, it was all online. And while it doesn't show up in the town's financial statements, you've saved parents hundreds of hours, and that is very much appreciated. So I like that change to the registration. My question, which the reason this is on my mind is because I understood the registration process and you have to prove you're from Arlington. There are two central facts about Arlington right now. We have very good schools and we have very high real estate. And the conflict between those two means that there may be an incentive for people who like Arlington schools, maybe start out in Arlington schools, to move to a lower cost community, but still send their children to Arlington schools. And so I'd like to understand from the superintendent what the process is for making sure that the people in Arlington schools do have residency. I'm not talking about contractually obliged cases where maybe a teacher sends their child there, but maybe there are people in our scope? Scope.
Yeah.
Okay, so scope. We have 5,000.
No, you can answer. I'd like an answer to that question.
We have 5,000 students in Arlington.
Dr. Bodie.
We have 5,000 students in Arlington. If 1% of them don't belong in the district, it's $700,000. So my question
Mr. Ellis, she's going to answer your question.
Oh,
Just don't have to argue it.
Okay, all right.
How do you police it, Dr. Bodie?
And I'm not asking for hard policemen. I'm wanting to be educated. I'm not saying we need to send out the police. I want to be educated about how big a problem this is or isn't. Thank you. I'll sit down.
Thank you. Well, I'm glad we saved you hundreds of the young parents hundreds of hours, and we're trying to get better at what we're doing with even the online part of it. As part of the registration process, you have to provide proof of residency, and there's various ways that you can do that. And you're right, some people can move or move out. There are different ways that happens. What I can tell you is that is something that we look at very carefully, and sometimes red flags come up. Every year, there are a few people who are not residents, and when that happens, they are unenrolled in the school district. But it's more nuanced and gray than you would expect in some situations. And we have, as a part of our public school, we have a court liaison who has many different hats, and one of them is being a truancy officer, attendance officer, and she follows up with these cases, and we do act on them. So this does happen. Do we catch every single one? I don't know, but we certainly are very diligent in trying to make sure this does not happen.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to discuss education? Ms. Memon.
Serena Moan, Precinct 21. I'm not sure I understand the student out-of-district tuition and transportation. Is this referring to the Metco students? There are 75 out of the whole 5,000. Is that the budget related? Because it's over 10% of the budget. Could you explain that?
Dr. Bodie?
Kathleen Bodie, Superintendent. Yes. Special education costs represent a sizable portion of our budget. Out-of-district refers to out-of-district placements for special education in either private or collaborative programs. The tuition for a collaborative program, which we are members of a collaborative, the Lab Collaborative, averages somewhere in the mid-$50,000 just for tuition. And then there's transportation that could be $14,000. We have other tuitions that can go as high as $80,000. And then if you have residential, that can be $250,000 to $400,000. So this is what it represents. It's actually a very conservative number, which is always a concern. You want a budget you want a budget so that you're covered, but at the same time you're not actually putting funds toward this when you may need them later for something else, such as a classroom teacher. That we follow our students very carefully, and this represents probably about 70% of the students that we are watching who potentially may need to have an out-of-district placement if we cannot provide in district the support and meet their needs educationally. So it is actually a very conservative number
So I'm
in the
curious,
budget.
when you say out-of-district placement, you said this is related to special education, or is
Totally. It has nothing to do with Medco. Medco is funded from a grant from the legislature through the Department of Education, and that grant pays for transportation as well as any of the direct costs for the Medco program in Arlington. The direct costs, such as the director or social worker.
Did you just tell me the number on the students that are out of special education or
Out of district?
Yes.
I think right now is about 114 students out of district.
All right. Great. Thank you.
But that number hasn't changed a lot in the last couple of years, and yet one of the things that you'll see is, as Dr. Allison Yampe said, in the last 5 years, our student population has grown by 700 students. So as a percent of the population, that part is not growing substantially, but tuitions grow, and we do add more students. So even if you add a few students every year, which is a smaller percentage than, as I said, of the total population, it's still money, and it's still a substantial cost to the district.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Anyone else on education? Okay. Seeing none, we have 4 budgets left. Oh, all right, let's hear your question, then we're going to stop education unless someone else has a question. Then we want to go home. I didn't see it, sorry. No, I think I was hopeful.
Deborah Sirotkin Butler, Precinct 19. The question is for Dr. Bodie, and as a few here may know, my child required out-of-district placement due to bullying when an aide was repurposed and he was assaulted, requiring hospital.
Yeah.
The question would be, is the anti-bullying policy currently sufficient to prevent out-of-district placements to keep students safe who cannot be kept safe in Arlington schools?
Dr. Bodie, can you answer that question?
Well, I can't speak to your personal situation. I don't know. We do take bullying very seriously and respond appropriately. We have policies in place. All of our teachers are reminded of those policies at the beginning of the year, and that's part of an ongoing professional development for teachers every year. But I can tell you that when a situation comes up, I'm often consulted, and our principals take that very seriously. We don't want any student to not feel safe in our schools. And a lot of the work we've been doing over the last few years on improving the social emotional culture of the building, one of the metrics in trying to see what the effect is actually to see the number of instances of reported bullying. And I don't have that data at my fingertips right now, but what I can say is that in the schools that have been, particularly schools that have adopted the responsive classroom approach, the number of referrals to the principal in any given day for discipline has gone down a lot. At the high school, they're doing work with collaborative problem solving, and again, they're seeing a drop. So this is the goal. This is what we're trying to do in our public schools, And so in a combination of the work on social emotional learning and also being very responsive to issues of bullying, I think hopefully will make the environment safe for all students. That's what we want to have happen.
So the two things I would hope, and I appreciate your answer very much, is that no student would require out-of-district placement in order to be kept safe, because the special needs population is more vulnerable, and that the restorative justice approach is utilized in these situations where possible.
Yes, yes. I don't know the circumstances of that, but I would certainly hope that would never be the case. Out-of-district placements are for students whose educational needs or emotional needs cannot be met in our schools.
Thank you very much.
Okay, anyone else on education? That'll close education. We have 4 budgets left. Wednesday, we're going to come back. We're going to start the special. As soon as we're done with that, we're going to go right back into the budgets. And then there's not many articles left. We could be efficient and finish up Wednesday. Any motions to reconsider? Mr. Tosti on 34. Anyone else? Motion to adjourn, accepted, seconded. All okay. See you Wednesday.